This is Richard Wolff responding to another Ask Prof Wolff question from our Patreon community. And this one comes from Edward Duhame. And he asks a basic question, which is easy for me to answer. Would it make a difference, he asks, if an industry was highly capitalized, that is, lots of machines per person, lots of capital invested in equipment per worker, versus an industry in which you don't have that, in which you have a little bit of equipment relative to workers, but the balance between capital and labor, there's more labor involved. And indeed, industries differ in how much capital per worker they involve. But in terms of worker co-ops, I don't think it makes very much of a difference. Ironically, co-ops probably work best if they don't have more than a certain relatively small number of workers, maybe counted in the dozens or the hundreds, or maybe even the low thousands, where workers can, at least over time, get to know one another, or at least most of one another, know each other, and get the benefits of that kind of closeness. Maybe even a few thousand is too many. What happens when you have more, larger conglomerations of workers? Well, by the way, this has been a problem in capitalism too. I think if you had worker co-ops, what you would probably do is break down the industries where workers are too many into subunits, subdepartments, divisions, if you like, where you can get the benefit of a relatively small number working together, understanding each other, knowing each other so they can work out the collective problems, because in a worker co-op, everybody is involved in the decision making. It's precisely the whole point not to have a tiny group at the top who make all the decisions for you. That's why capitalism is giving way to worker co-ops in the first place. And you want to preserve that, and you want to guard that. And so I think what you'll do and what you'll see happening is that beyond a certain size, if an enterprise grows, a factory, an office, or a store, if it grows and it reaches a certain size, and that can vary, and that itself will have to be worked out by the co-op economy or the co-op-based economy, when it reaches a certain size, they will then subdivide and create two enterprises. They can be closely linked. They can communicate and coordinate their decisions. All that's fine. But you want a decision-making, working environment that can be genuinely democratic, where everybody understands, everybody participates, and the division of labor among people is something they together work out and likely rotate precisely so that no small group ends up with a disproportionate amount of the power and the decision making. Will there be some costs to having smaller units that can work in a democratic cooperative way? Yes. But that's like saying, will there be some cost if you have a small group at the top? You bet there are costs. There are crashes of capitalism every 4 to 7 years because the small groups make decisions that leave large numbers of people unemployed, which is a catastrophic loss, not just for those people, but for all the goods and services those people could have continued to produce if they had all been part of the decision-making process, because the irrationality of unemployment for a worker co-op is so obvious it would not occur. Whereas in capitalism, they've been unable to stop having unemployment throughout the 300 years that they've been around. And when I say that, let me drive the point home. In a worker co-op, if the demand for what you produce disappears, you produce something else. If you need fewer workers than you used to, then the system works out where those workers go next. You know where? To those areas where the demand for goods are going up. All of that is worked out with a basic commitment that the worker is secure in a job and an income, no matter what happens to people's tastes or to changing technology. There is a support for the worker that doesn't exist in capitalism, which is why it's sometimes hard for people to get their heads around this kind of thing. But no, it doesn't matter whether it's high tech or low tech. You can work out the alternative worker co-op way of organizing things as a substitute for a capitalism. And after all, when you have a capitalism working like the American capitalism is working today, we've been warned about global warming, and yet we have catastrophic fires in California. We've been warned that viruses are a threat to the human community, but we were unprepared for this pandemic, and we can't contain it, like we were unprepared for the fires and the global warming, even though we knew about it, just like we knew about viruses, but our system doesn't protect the land from the fire and doesn't protect the people and our public health from that virus. And now we're also going through an economic crash. Let me remind you, capitalism crashes every 4 to 7 years. It has for the entire history of the United States. Of course we should be prepared for the next crash, so we don't have unemployment, so we don't have all the suffering that Americans are going through. The problems of capitalism are so severe that we really ought to have long ago begun to turn, as we are doing now slowly, to worker co-ops as the alternative, precisely because in that alternative we have a better shot at preparing ourselves than at capitalism that has proven itself incapable of doing so. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, thanking again all of those in our Patreon community for their invaluable support.